Riku reached the far side and slowed, just enough for the movement to register. Across the crossing, Kaito did the same. Neither of them turned immediately. Then they did, at the same time. The signal shifted again and the crowd began to move in the opposite direction, the lines resetting as if nothing had happened. Riku stepped forward, Kaito followed from the other end. The movement shifted from walking to something faster, the distance between them closing as they moved through the crowd without breaking their line of sight. This is Men Being Too Intimate Season 4. In the middle of crossing. The stage had been set, 2 chairs placed close together at the center, angled toward the audience. A small table, covered in cloth, the edge brushing the floor. 2 glasses already filled and waiting near the front. Then the doors opened. Riku stepped out ahead of the queue. The open collar of his shirt softening the line of his neck, the chain at his throat shifting slightly as he moved.
"Thank you,"
he said, the mic picking it up as he reached the center, his gaze already lifting toward the front rows as if the attention belonged there. Kaito followed a step behind, he moved differently. His posture already aligned before he reached the mark. The dark line of his shirt sat clean against him, nothing shifting as he stopped. He lifted his hand instead, a brief acknowledgement toward the audience, his expression composed, unreadable from a distance. They took their seats. Riku didn't sit straight. He turned slightly as he settled, his body angled toward Kaito instead of the audience. The chair shifted softly under him. Kaito adjusted his position once, aligning himself before sitting. The movement contained, precise. The host stepped in, voice warm, already smiling through the introduction. Their names landed together. Riku turned toward Kaito.
"You ready to put on a show?"
Kaito's answer came a second later.
"You bet I am."
How has it been working together?
The first question followed without pause.
Actually, it was really fun working with Kaito. It was our first time working together.
He glanced at Kaito mid-sentence before continuing.
Kaito made it easy.
He never misses his cue.
He shifted, the fabric of his sleeve brushing lightly as his arm moved across the table. Kaito smiled at that.
"We got along very well. I felt comfortable around Riku. And how can you resist his looks? Come on."
Riku picked it up immediately.
That's his version of easy.
More laughter. The host leaned in, pushing forward.
"And Offset?"
Riku didn't hesitate.
"Yeah, we are close. Friends?
He looked at Kaito. Kaito looked back and smiled.
Just friend?"
Riku turned toward him again, closer now.
You make it sound like there's more.
We're very close friends.
Kaito said. The sound came faster this time. The host laughed, letting it land.
You're taking care of him already?
Riku didn't pull back.
Someone has to.
The reaction came again, stronger now. Kaito didn't respond to that directly. The next question came how they would describe their dynamic. Riku answered first.
Fire.
The room reacted before he finished the word. Kaito paused.
Professional,
he said.
That sounds worse than it is.
Riku let out a soft laugh.
See this? He jokes too much.
Kaito said.
He's fun to make fun of.
Riku said, the smile back in his voice. Kaito's answer followed even.
I let him.
The audience responded like it confirmed something. From the front, it held as something easy, something already in place. At the table, every movement landed where it needed to. Nothing slipped far enough to break it. But not everything stayed still either. The lights dimmed, and the room settled into the shape of the theater. Riku and Kaito sat at the front. The film opened in stillness. Kaito, as Lord Haranori, moved through an ordered interior, his steps measured, the space arranged with care, the structure of the room reflecting the discipline he carried. The break came without warning. Riku, as the ninja Ren, crossed the frame where no one was expected to be. He cut across the space, closing distance in a way that disrupted everything that had just been set. A low reaction moved through the audience. On screen, the noble turned, steel was drawn. The fight followed without pause, each exchange held just long enough to register. The ninja closing distance quickly, the noble redirecting, keeping the structure intact as it was being broken. The room quieted. The shift came in the middle of it. The noble's blade drove forward and caught along the ninja's mask, the edge dragging across the fabric before tearing through. Recognition followed, it was carried in the line,
Ren?
The scene shifted. The frame broke into memory. Younger versions of them moved through a different light. The structure of the world softened. The space between them no longer held by distance. The noble no longer measured, the ninja no longer hidden. The difference between them not yet defined by what they would become. The audience followed it, the reaction quieter now. On screen, the closeness was easy, shared space, shared movement. A moment held too long to be mistaken for anything else. It shifted once more. Ren stepped in first. Harunori didn't pull away. They kissed. The audience reacted to that, softer this time, a few voices breaking through before settling again. The tone changed again. The light dropped. Fire replaced it. A house broken open, movement cutting through it without restraint. The structure that had held everything before collapsed under it. The audience quieted. At the center of it, Ren's family. They did not survive it. The house stood broken open, bodies left where they had fallen. Ren was nowhere to be found. The frame held that absence. In the front row, Riku leaned back slightly in his seat. Kaito's gaze stayed forward. On screen, the fight resumed where it had been left, the distance between them unchanged, but the weight no longer the same. The movements slowed, the exchanges losing their edge, familiarity sitting where conflict should have been. The audience began to respond earlier, a few drawn-out sounds carrying across the rows. The closeness extended past the point it needed to.
I looked for you.
The ninja didn't pull away.
To kill me?
The room reacted. On screen, the restraint didn't hold. The distance closed. The kiss was not rushed. It was held long enough for the audience to settle into it, long enough that the scene began to linger past its own logic. A few voices broke through, someone laughed, someone else didn't. Fabric shifted next. Layers loosened just enough to suggest what the scene wanted to say. Kaito closed his eyes. Riku didn't look away, but his posture changed, the angle of his shoulders easing back into the seat. The film kept going. The final sequence, two facing each other, blades held between them.
If this life won't hold us, then the next one will.
Movement broke in from both sides, figures entering the frame in numbers. The structure of the scene widening as the two clans closed in, surrounding them.
Find me again. I will find you.
They stepped forward at the same time. The cut came just before the outcome. The audience reacted immediately louder now, a mix of sharp sounds and applause that carried longer than expected. Somewhere behind them, someone began to cry. Riku glanced down once, checking the time before returning his attention forward. Kaito didn't move. The screen faded, and the room held the silence for a moment before the lights began to rise. Riku and Kaito stood with the rest of the cast, stepping forward as the curtain call began, the line forming across the stage, the energy returning to something public again. They bowed together. When they straightened, the smiles were already in place. Flashes began to pop along the front rows. The host returned, catching the momentum, a few questions taken before the room settled.
The kiss scene. How did you approach it?
A reaction moved through the audience before either of them answered. Riku picked it up easily.
I was surprised. He's actually a good kisser.
The room broke. Kaito didn't interrupt.
We stayed with the scene.
When he spoke, it was even. Another question followed, this time about the fight. Riku shifted, then lifted the edge of his shirt.
I did my own stunts.
Just enough to show the bruise along his side. The line carried with a small grin.
I should apologize. My sword caught him during the take.
Kaito looked at Riku.
Sorry, Riku. I hope it didn't hurt.
He said, the tone steady. Riku let it sit, then answered with a half laugh.
I'll survive.
They stood close. The space between them reduced without effort. Then the host closed it, the cast bowing once more as the applause carried them off the stage. Backstage, the sound dropped. The hallway moved in a different rhythm, voices lower, the structure of the event dissolving as people split off. Riku didn't head to his room. He turned instead, pushing open the door marked for smoking. He stepped inside and let the door close behind him.
Finally.
He drew on the cigarette once, held the smoke, then let it out slowly. Across the hall, Kaito entered his room.
Thank God it's over.
He dropped into the chair, the smile gone. He exhaled once, steady. The next day, Riku sat with his phone in his hand, scrolling through clips from the press screening. His line about the kiss appeared more than once. He slowed when the clip shifted to the moment he lifted his shirt. The bruise held on screen longer than anything else.
I did my own stunts.
He watched it once more, then lowered the phone slightly, his hand moving to the same spot along his side. The set came back into focus. The same fight sequence was already in place, the marks taped along the floor, the table positioned just off the line, everything arranged to guide the movement if it was followed correctly. Riku stepped into position with the sword in his hand, adjusting his grip once, then setting his stance. The first exchange landed close enough, but the second came early, his step closing distance before it should have, the blade passing too near before he corrected. They reset without comment and he moved back into place, rolling his shoulder once as if that would recalibrate something that had not been held in the first place. This time he held back too long, correcting late, the movement losing its shape halfway through, forcing him to push forward to make it look intentional. On the next pass, he pivoted too wide. His foot didn't land where it was meant to, and the momentum carried him offline before he could recover, his side striking hard against the edge of the shelf. His hand moved to his side, pressing to register what had happened.
Again!
Someone asked if he was fine, but he didn't answer. Across from him, Kaito watched, one hand resting loose at his side. When Riku hit the table, he let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. They ran it again. The timing held longer this time, not because it had settled, but because Riku forced it to. It still wasn't clean, but it passed.
One more time!
Someone called from off to the side. Riku nodded once, already stepping back to reset again. The memory dropped. Riku's phone buzzed in his hand. He was back in his room, the screen still lit with the paused clip, his thumb resting just below the image of the bruise. The vibration continued. He looked down at the name, Studio. Riku answered immediately, the motion quick, already shifting as he brought the phone up. Kaito sat in the Hinoki bath, the water held at a steady heat, the surface barely moving as he rested back against the edge, his arm set along the rim. His manager stepped in.
Have you seen it? The reactions from last night. It's moving fast. The kiss scene is everywhere.
Kaito didn't respond. He set his phone down within reach. Kaito's gaze shifted once, just enough to register it, then returned forward as if it didn't require more attention than that. The set came back into focus. They were already in position, the lighting set, the camera waiting, everything arranged to hold the moment if it landed correctly. Kaito caught it before the contact settled, the smell reaching him first, the trace of smoke still sitting between them. His hand came up and pushed Riku back to stop the movement cleanly before it could continue.
How many times did I tell you not to smoke before this?
Riku didn't answer, and Kaito didn't wait for one.
Can we break after lunch? I can't do it like this. We're tight.
The director said.
I'll be back after lunch.
Kaito stepped away from the set. His manager followed at a distance. Kaito leaned slightly toward him and said something low that didn't carry. His manager nodded once and moved off. Kaito turned and headed to his room, pushing the door open and stepping inside, then crossed to the sofa and lay down without removing anything. They reset again, the marks unchanged. The distance set exactly where it had been before, though the air between them no longer held the same neutrality. Riku leaned in, just enough for his voice to stay between them, and said under his breath,
I didn't smoke, so let's just get through it.
The director called cue. This time Kaito did not pull back, allowing the distance to collapse fully as the contact landed and held, the kiss settling into place, and for a fraction of a second it followed the same line as before. The taste in his breath reached Riku. Riku stilled, his breath tightening where it should have stayed even, the realization landing cleanly as the contact held. Garlic. The director didn't cut.
Keep going,
He said, the line carrying across the set, then louder, pushing it further. The moment extended, the structure bending around it instead of holding it in place, until...
Cut!
Riku pulled back immediately, his hand coming up once to his mouth before dropping, exhaling through his nose as if that would clear it. He looked at Kaito.
What was that?
Kaito adjusted his sleeve, as if the take had ended cleanly, his attention already moving past it. Around them, the set returned to motion, crew stepping in, voices overlapping, the camera resetting, the structure closing back over what had just happened. Back in the bath, Kaito shifted slightly, the last of the moment on set slipping past without settling. Near the door, his manager was already finishing the call.
Studio just called. They want to see you today,
he said. Kaito reached for the towel as the phone began to ring. Kaito took the phone and answered, and Riku's voice came through without greeting, asking if he got the call from the studio. The studio executive began before either of them had fully settled.
We're moving forward with the sequel.
The decision presented as something already confirmed, rather than something still open. Riku leaned back slightly in his seat, his gaze shifting once toward Kaito before returning to the table.
But we died?
The studio executive nodded as if that had already been accounted for.
Exactly. You come back.
The stack came to rest between them, the options laid out without emphasis, as if the scale of it did not require explanation.
We're opening the structure.
He continued.
Same connection, different lives. We'll test what resonates. They meet again. It doesn't need to be explained.
The room held that for a moment, not with tension, but with the absence of response.
The compensation increases with each release.
The executive said,
Base is doubled for the sequel, with escalators attached to subsequent timelines.
Riku's mouth opened slightly before he caught it, his hand stilling against the edge of the page before he drew it back and gave a small nod. Kaito's gaze shifted to him, registering it without comment, and then moved away again as if nothing in that moment required acknowledgement. The studio executive continued.
We'll need continuity off-screen as well. The pairing carries outside the film. Coffee dates, events, appearances, visibility.
Riku didn't respond immediately, and Kaito didn't either. The terms already in place, before either of them needed to agree. Riku glanced toward Kaito again, brief and contained, and Kaito met it without holding, the exchange passing without comment as the thought settled between them anyway. The table at the café had already been chosen for them, set near the window, the angle working in their favor without needing to be adjusted.
We should probably set some rules.
Kaito said, his tone light.
For what?
Riku said.
No smoking before kiss scenes.
Riku let out a short breath through his nose, something close to a laugh.
No garlic.
He added. Kaito's mouth shifted, the reaction there before it settled, and for a moment the tension that had been sitting between them loosened without either of them needing to force it.
Admit it.
Kaito said after a beat, his tone even.
You liked it.
Seriously?
Riku looked at him.
You didn't stop me.
Riku held that for a second, then the laugh came. Both of them leaning forward slightly, the distance between them narrowing while the moment carried.
You want to try it yourself next time? See how I felt?
Riku said. Outside, a camera clicked, but neither of them turned.
Do you like onsen?
Kaito asked. Riku looked up, the question catching him off guard just enough to show. Kaito didn't explain it.
Do you?
Riku considered it.
Yeah. There's a place up north. It's quiet. Not many people.
Why not? It's not like we haven't seen each other naked.
Next week?
Kaito said.
Yeah, next week.
Outside, another camera clicked. The reading rehearsal took place around a long table, the script laid open in front of them, the writer seated across, watching more than directing as he allowed the scene to settle before stepping in. Riku turned a page, then another, his attention fixed on the text.
I get they meet again, but how do I know?
They don't remember,
the writer replied. Kaito looked up.
Then what triggers it?
The writer held his gaze for a moment.
Recognition.
Riku leaned back slightly, the chair shifting under him. Neither of them pushed it further after that, the pages remaining open between them as if the scene had already moved past the point of discussion. The set shifted to Shibuya Crossing. The noise carried through the speakers, the signals timed, the flow controlled, everything in place before they stepped into it. The crossing began. Riku stepped forward with the crowd, his pace easy, his movement blending without effort, while Kaito entered from the opposite side with a steadier rhythm, his posture held even as the bodies around him shifted. They crossed through the same space and passed each other without contact. The scene could have ended there. Riku reached the far side and slowed, just enough for the movement to register. Across the crossing, Kaito did the same. Neither of them turned immediately. Then they did, at the same time. The signal shifted again and the crowd began to move in the opposite direction, the lines resetting as if nothing had happened. Riku stepped forward, Kaito followed from the other end. The movement shifted from walking to something faster. the distance between them closing as they move through the crowd without breaking their line of sight. They reach the center of the crossing, the contact landing without hesitation, the kiss coming through the motion, not shaped or adjusted, but carried by the same force that had drawn them back toward each other. The crowd continued around them, the signals shifting, the flow resetting again, but they remained where they were, the moment extending beyond what had been written, beyond what had been planned. No one called cut. The camera stayed with them. The city moved. And for the first time, nothing about it felt like performance. An ENTP moves through the world by testing it, idea by idea, pushing, shifting, seeing what holds and what gives way. For Riku, nothing stays fixed unless it proves it can. An INFJ moves differently, pattern by pattern, reading what sits beneath the surface, what connects before it's spoken. For Kaito, things don't happen without meaning. They set rules for the work, what to keep, what not to bring into the scene. But somewhere between what was planned and what wasn't, they stopped following them. An ENTP and an INFJ. Different ways of moving through the same moment. But sometimes recognition doesn't wait to be understood. It just asks to be followed. This is Men Being Too Intimate Season 4. In the middle of crossing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories on gay audiobooks. Also, my short novel, Men Being Too Intimate series, are now available on Kindle Unlimited. You'll find a link in the description. YouTube membership is now open. Behind closed doors. Early access to upcoming stories. Occasional behind-the-story exclusives. If you want to support me, please do join in. Thank you.